into the role, and all of a sudden, he's the successor to Moses, which would be an incredibly challenging task were that the case, because Moses, as far as just mere human beings are concerned, I would say that Moses is arguably the greatest leader in human history. I don't know of anybody who had to do what he had to do and did it so well, trusting in the Lord. So to take his place, impossible without the kind of help that's needed. But that's not the case. Joshua wasn't just thrown into the hole, into the role of leading the people in the conquering and possession of the land of Canaan. He had been prepared for it. And as is the case in ministry, the Lord prepares those whom he's called. And he works through those that he has prepared. It's important. Preparation is very important. So we're going to talk a little bit about Joshua's preparation leading up to this time when he's now in transition. First point is he learned warfare. And I think specifically he learned spiritual warfare. There was a situation that arose because the Amalekites were starting to fight with Israel in Rephidim. And so Moses said to Joshua, choose some men and go fight against Amalek. And I'm going to go to the top of the hill. I'm going to have the rod of God in my hand, and I'm going to hold it up. And so whenever that happened, whenever Moses went to the top of the hill and they're down in the valley fighting and he held his rod up in the air, Israel prevailed. But whenever his hands got weary and he began to slacken the raising of his rod, then Amalek prevailed. And so Aaron and Hur joined Moses there and held up his hand so that there would be victory. That's a picture of spiritual warfare. When we, as believers, put on the whole armor of God, we are able to stand against the schemes of the devil, and having done all, we will stand. This was a spiritual battle. It wasn't just a matter of military expertise. It wasn't just a matter of knowing how to do it. It wasn't because of the military training that any of them had received. It was because the Lord gave them victory. So he learned that being associated with Moses. So there's preparation there, and that's significant. Every believer needs to learn how to put on the whole armor of God. Otherwise, we'll collapse under the pressures and under the stresses that ministry provides. Secondly, he learns servanthood. In Exodus 24, it tells us that Moses arose with his assistant Joshua. So Joshua became Moses' assistant, or maybe assistant pastor-like role. In other words, what Moses was doing, Joshua was involved. Wherever Moses went, Joshua was there. And Joshua observed Moses in every situation. The context of Exodus 24 that's up on your screen is that the Lord had told Moses to come up to the mountain. He's going to give him a couple of tablets of stone and the laws and the commandments that he had already given to the people. And so Moses arose and Joshua went with him. So that's preparation, learning servanthood. It's really important to learn how to serve. It's really important to learn that it's about others, it's not about me, it's not about us, it's about others. That's the key word. Gail Irwin, who has been very influential within the Calvary Chapel Fellowship of Churches, his one-word mantra is the word others. Others. He had a bumper sticker made representing the ministry that God had given him. And the bumper sticker had one word, others. It's a good word. And others equates to servanthood, and servanthood is about others. So Joshua learned that and was operating in that realm. Preparation. He also learned Moses' heart and Moses' soul. After being in the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, the Lord spoke to Moses and said, "Get down and go to the people because they have corrupted themselves. They have made a golden calf, and they've begun to worship it and say that these are your gods, O Israel, that have brought you out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I've seen this people. It's a stiff-necked people. Let me alone, Moses, that I might consume them in my wrath against them. And Moses, he wasn't going to agree with that so quickly. He knew that the Lord is merciful and gracious. He knew that the Lord, for him, mercy triumphs over judgment. He knew that the Lord wanted to be forgiving and gracious to his people. And he knew that it wasn't the Lord's primary intention to destroy them. And so Moses drew near to the Lord and said, listen, if you do this, then the Egyptians are going to say, the only reason you brought them out of Egypt is so that you could kill them and wipe them out in the wilderness. They're going to consider you an inept God that's not able to fulfill your promises. So turn from this fierce wrath. And the Lord then relented from the harm he said he would do to his people. Now, some people struggle with this, thinking that Moses talked God out of doing something, and the Lord changed his mind. He was going to do something, and he changed his mind. And then the answer to that is yes and no. I believe that it's very clear that the Lord's primary intention was to work with Israel, to be patient with them, to bring them into the land. That's what he was going to do. But Moses became now, in this situation, the intercessor of intercessors. I mean, he was a man who stood in the gap. So this was a test of Moses and an illustration of what can happen when someone prays to the Lord about something that is already on the Lord's heart. Starting with the promise of God, starting with the ways of God. That's how we begin our prayer. Lord, you said such and such, that this is the kind of thing that you do. Therefore, I'm asking you to do the kind of thing that you do. And that's what Moses did in interceding for the people. And, of course, Joshua was there watching all of this, learning the heart and soul of Moses. Then Moses came down from the mountain, and now he's seeing with his own eyes what they had actually done. He was seeing with his own eyes the golden calf, the dancing, the laughter, the merriment, the idolatry, and it was abhorrent to him. And Moses knew that this was very, very grave. And so Moses said to the people, you have committed a great sin. I'm going to the Lord. Maybe I can make atonement for your sin. And then Moses prayed. He said, oh, these people have committed a great sin and have made themselves a god of gold. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin. And then the translations put a dash after that statement. And now, if you will forgive their sin. And there's a dash, which represents probably a period of silence. But if not, I pray, blot me out of the book which you have written. That makes Moses, aside from the Lord Jesus, the greatest intercessor of all time. Because he was willing to put his life on the line in order that God's people would be saved. Paul the Apostle said the same thing in Romans, where he would be willing to be accursed from Christ if his brethren, according to the flesh, the Jews, could be saved. So Joshua saw this. He saw the heart, learned the heart and the soul of Moses. Of course, the Lord answered Moses and said, whoever sinned against me, him I will blot out of my book. So, in other words, the people are going to be accountable for their own sins. He learned from Moses' example in the matter of the tent of meeting. Moses took a tent, his own tent, and took it outside of the camp and called it the tabernacle of meeting. And he would go out there to spend time with the Lord, and the Lord would meet him in the cloud. And the Lord would speak with Moses, Moses would speak with the Lord, and the people who sought the Lord would go out and join that worship service that was going on between Yahweh and Moses. That was what was happening. And then he would return to the camp, Moses would. But when he returned to the camp after Moses was done out at the tabernacle of meeting, Joshua, his servant, would hang out there and just stay, linger in the afterglow of that encounter, and he didn't depart from the tabernacle. So what was that teaching Joshua? It was teaching him the importance of spending personal time with the Lord and hearing from the Lord and hearing his voice and communing with God being the most important part of one's day. He was being prepared. And then in another situation, unrelated to the previous one, there were two men that had remained in the camp. One was named Eldad and the other was named Medad. And the Spirit was upon them and they were prophesying. They were speaking the heart and mind of God to the people in the camp. So a young, zealous man came to Moses and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Joshua heard it. He said, Moses, my Lord, forbid them. Don't allow them to do this. How could they presume upon themselves to prophesy themselves out in the camp? Are they authorized to do this? Are they called to do this? Moses, my Lord, forbid them, Joshua said. Then Moses said to him, are you zealous for my sake? Oh, that all the Lord's people were prophets and that the Lord would put his Spirit upon them. Again, Joshua saw this heart that was in Moses. What does that heart represent? Moses wasn't going to be someone who was jealous about somebody else being used of the Lord. He wasn't going to forbid someone that wasn't in his inner circle from doing something kingdom-minded. He was going to let that go, and he wanted it to happen. And he said, would all the Lord's people that they were prophets and the Lord would put his Spirit upon them. And Joshua no doubt learned from that. And his faith grew also through testing. In the book of Numbers, you've got the testimony of the 12 spies that had been sent into the land of Canaan to spy out the land. 10 of those spies brought back a horrifying bad report. There are giants in the land. It's a difficult land. There are too many obstacles. There are walled cities. We can't defeat them. We can't go into the land. But Joshua and Caleb, they were the only two that remained faithful to the Lord. And they challenged that decision of the other 10 spies to be contrary in the whole matter. And they spoke to the congregation. And Joshua and Caleb spoke to the congregation saying, the land we pass through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into the land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And all the congregation said, let's stone them with stones. Every leader knows something about this, maybe not to this extreme. But you know that the Lord is in something, you know that the Lord has commanded something, and so you start out on the path to see the Lord do what he said he wants to do. And there are those that are naysayers. There are those that don't see the possibility of it. There are those that complain about it. And the necessity for the leader is to face those complaints, because those are complaints born out of unbelief and rebellion. You got to deal with unbelief and rebellion as a shepherd of a church. It happens sometimes. And that's exactly what Joshua did along with Caleb. And then, of course,